Shabbat Shalom. Last year, during Sukkot, we were having such a nice holiday that we decided to extend our Sukkah dinners, our Sukkot dinners, one more day into Shmini Atzeret, which is not a necessary thing to do. But when you have this Sukkah that feels so beautiful to be in, we decided to invite our guests back to enjoy the night with us. So it was an incredibly special night. I remember it as if it were yesterday. We had our neighbors, we had some friends, and we sat in this booth, right, this sukkah, with green walls and trees and bamboo overhead and sort of these fun decorations that our family had done together. And it seemed like the world, I don't know, the night at least felt perfect. We stayed, we lingered, we had drinks, we had a delicious dinner. And I went to sleep that night having that feeling of sort of wholeness or nourishment that comes from just feeling really very much at peace. You know that feeling? So I went to sleep that night, and I was probably asleep for, I don't know, a handful of hours when my husband's red alert started going off. Does anyone have red alert here? It's an app that whenever Israel is under attack, it sends a notification. We don't use technology on Shabbat, but he must have left something in the corner of some room that we could hear the red alert going off. And it went off again and again and again and again and again, and it just didn't stop. I had fallen back asleep, thinking it was just sort of a typical night, because that does typically happen. But when I woke up, I was coming here for Simchat Torah, and my husband stopped me on the way out the door. And he said, "Dana, I need to tell you something before you go to synagogue." And he said, "The red alert's been going off like it's never been going off before." He said, "Something really bad is happening in Israel." So our middle daughter is our middle daughter. She is up in her room. We go to tell her the news, and she already knows. Our son is in Israel, in Jerusalem at the time. Someone knows that the old city hasn't been hit yet, that they're safe, it seems, in the old city. But we didn't know until later on how bad that day was, October 7th. It's a day that has been dreadful the entire year, but now, in the midst of Sukkot, that's going into Simchat Torah, I've been having conversations again in my sukkah where people are saying that they don't think they're going to be able to come to synagogue this year for Simchat Torah, that there's too many memories attached. It's a hard time to be commanded by our tradition to feel joyful. Because the truth is that it doesn't feel like a time that joy is easy to access. When you think about our world and the Jewish world right now, Israel is at war with enemies surrounding it. We have over 100 of our people still being held in captivity in Gaza. We have over 90,000 people that are displaced. It's not an easy time to feel joyful, and what's happening all over the Middle East feels, again, really dark and hard. So I want to start today by telling you a story. It's a story that I've recently learned. It was an article in a compilation that I was reading, and it was about Beethoven and about Beethoven's Ode to Joy. So as it turns out, Beethoven was in a class when he was a teenager. He was auditing a class at University of Bonn. And he read a poem that was written by Friedrich Schiller. And he was deeply inspired by it. He would think about that poem for decades. But he was living in a really difficult time. He was living in Vienna. It was a period of tumult in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars. And he was suffering, in his words, and I quote him, "misery in a most concentrated form. Misery that affected both his body and his soul." He was going deaf. His teacher and musical hero, mentor, Haydn, had died. He had been in love with a woman for 6 years, and that love was going unrequited. His family life was in shambles. He spent a year bedridden with a mysterious illness and was riddled with skull-splitting headaches. And then, when you would think that things couldn't get any worse for him, they mistakenly thought that he was a tramp. And so they threw him in jail and mocked him for claiming to be Beethoven. So somehow, despite all of these sufferings, Beethoven kept composing. And 27 years after he took that class and fell in love with Schiller's poem, he decided to bring it to life in music. So he canceled and he uncanceled his concert several times. He had 2 disastrous rehearsals in 1824, and then completely deaf, Beethoven took the stage to conduct the premiere of his creative masterpiece, the first symphony ever to incorporate words or a chorus. So after the final chord of Ode to Joy was played, there was a gasping silence. And then that silence, that audience broke into a scream of applause. People leapt to their feet, they waved their handkerchiefs, and they started chanting his name, Beethoven, Beethoven, Beethoven. But Beethoven was still facing the orchestra. He was still waving his arms in conducting, and he couldn't hear it. And so Caroline Unger, a 19-year-old who Beethoven had chosen to sing Ode to Joy, she stood up, she took his arm, and she gently turned Beethoven around. Ode to Joy, he knew, had become the crowning achievement, his crowning accomplishment, the choral final of the 9th and final symphony. Out of a place of profound darkness, Beethoven created a triumph of joy. Today, we celebrate the festival of Sukkot and Shabbat, which might be called the Jewish community's Ode to Joy. Because joy is what we are commanded to do on this holiday. In fact, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, "You shall be joyful at your festival, b'samachta b'chagecha, with your sons and your daughters and your males and your females and the strangers and the orphans and the widows. You should hold a festival in a place that God will choose, for God will bless all of your crops and all of your undertakings, and you shall have nothing but joy. V'hayita ach sameach." But there's something that's actually really interesting in this last translation, which says, "You shall have nothing but joy." V'hayita ach sameach. We oftentimes think of it as "you shall have nothing but joy." But the word ach can also mean despite. So the idea here is that we can experience joy despite what's going on in the world around us. So this year, as accessing joy feels more difficult than perhaps ever before in my lifetime, the question is, how do we experience joy despite? So Rabbi Nachman was an 18th century Hasidic master, and he also was plagued by debilitating depression. And he understood that if you want to experience joy, you had to actively choose to do that. And what he said was in the way of an analogy. He said, sometimes when people are happy and they dance, there are others outside of the circle that are depressed or gloomy. And so he says, against their will, the people inside the circle have to reach outside the circle and bring those people in, because it's there that they too will be able to access joy. In other words, Rabbi Nachman realized that you're not always going to want to feel joyful, or maybe you can't access that joy. But sometimes all that's required is to move closer to those who can, or a place where joy can be found. So Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, he talks a lot about simcha, or joy. He says that one can really only experience joy, true joy, when they're with others. He says an individual alone can be happy or pleasured, but they can't experience joy because, he says, simcha in the Torah, joy, is never about an individual. It has to be about something that we share. Joy can't be experienced in solitude. And so today I share these words with you, saying, we don't know what tomorrow will bring. We don't know, for now, if it will feel safe or comfortable or easy to live as a Jew, even in America. But what we do know is that when we focus on the moment, when we allow ourselves, or sometimes force ourselves, to dance, to sing, or to give gratitude, to give appreciation, then sometimes in all of those things, we can experience a sense of joy that's unexpected. This week we read in Kohelet, to everything there is a season, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance. And so I want to share today that this is our moment to laugh, to heal, to build up, and to dance. Sukkot is our time to do all of those fun things, which in some ways we may not want to do this year because it doesn't feel like our hearts are in a joyful place. But as the words of Hallel remind us, Zeh hayom asa Adonai, nagila v'nismecha bo. This is the day today that God created for us. So let us all look for and find that joy in it. And let's raise our voices and sing out today our Jewish ode to joy. Shabbat Shalom and Chag Sameach. May our holidays all be joyful.